I've got a message for CEOs. If you want to run a more efficient company and operation, sometimes taking a hands-off approach isn't a bad idea. If you don't believe me, I've got the numbers to back it up. According to the American Management Association, organizations which delegate effectively see a 30% increase in employee engagement and productivity. Meanwhile, Forbes tells us that employers who delegate effectively will see a 33% increase in revenue. Gallup chimes in and says that employees who feel that their skills are being used through delegation, their engagement levels will rise by as much as 70%. And finally, according to CEO Monthly, those who engage in employee delegation as business owners will see a significantly less turnover rate. For my friend Jim Schleckser, he's an accomplished leader, entrepreneur, and CEO coach with diverse experience across multiple industries. He's the CEO and founder of the CEO Project, a renowned executive coaching company specializing in high-revenue entrepreneurs. Jim offers the benefit of his decades of experience and a highly distinctive coaching program which combines peer group discussions coupled with one-on-one sessions as well, which are all led by former CEOs. Jim advocates for the concept of the lazy CEO, emphasizing the importance of delegation and time management as essential tools for effective leadership. And he joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn about the CEO Project and your time in business, my friend. Great to be with you this morning, and thank you so very much for being here.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. So, Jim, tell me about the CEO Project, my friend. I know it's an innovative coaching program that's led in part by former CEOs to really help high revenue entrepreneurs. So I'm wondering if you can tell me all about it and what makes it so fabulous, my friend.
So what we do is we build CEO peer groups and advisory boards effectively for CEOs with other CEOs on the boards. And so this goes back to Napoleon Hill. He talked about mastermind groups, having a group of people that want you to be successful and care for you around you. That's exactly what we build. We generally do it for larger companies, sort of $20 million on up to our largest are just under $4 billion. And all of this is led and facilitated by former CEOs. So we've all run companies at scale. We get it. We know the questions to ask. And what we find is when people have a great group like that around them, they have better performance. And that's why people do it. So that's why it's fabulous.
Absolutely, my friend. And I know that you advocate for a concept you've coined, the lazy CEO, my friend, which emphasizes the importance of efficient delegation and time management, my friend, and as I'm sure you know in business, time and your getting that back into your schedule is the goal of every entrepreneur, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And, the whole idea of the book, The Lazy CEO, and it's called Great CEOs Are Lazy is the name of the book. The idea is that they're not actually lazy. That's really the title of the book. But the idea is that really good CEOs figure out the most critical issue in their business, and they spend 30-40% of their time on that issue. And they kind of ignore all the other stuff that shows up on our desk and in our email and so forth. And that allows them to work a normal number of hours, 50, something like that, and still get a lot done. And so it's really about eliminating all the distractions and only focusing on the critical issue, what we call the point of constraint in the business. And if you can do that consistently, you got a great outcome in terms of the growth and profitability of your business and the number of people you serve. So that's the trick of the book. Now you don't need to read the book.
If I need a refresher course, I'll keep it on my nightstand, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Jim, I wanted to dive into the whole idea of diagnosing sort of the constraints of a business because I know that each individual business has different constraints, my friend. And from a leadership perspective, I'm curious if you had to write sort of a 3 or 5 step roadmap in sort of diagnosing constraints of businesses and how to overcome them. I'm wondering what would you put on that roadmap and why, my friend?
Yeah. So when you're looking for the point of constraint, sometimes it's obvious. If I could just get more sales, I could have a better business. And what we talk about, there are hats that we talk about the CEOs wearing. When you're trying to find the point of constraint, you either do analysis, what we call learner mode, or you do player mode, where you dive in and actually do the job. And you could imagine running a call center, for example. And if you went and worked in the call center for half a day, you'd probably figure out what the problem was in the call center pretty quickly. So analyst or player to find the point of constraint. And generally you have a pretty good idea what it is, but you might have 2 or 3 options where you go into analysis and player on each of those to figure out which is the most important. Once you've understood the point of constraint, there are 3 hats that we use to fix the point of constraint. One is architect, which is your business model. It's what you do for whom, the margin you make, the capital you need, all those things. There's a problem in my business model, for example. That's the architect hat if we're fixing that. Coach, that's about talent. Do I have the right people in the company? Or have they been trained properly? Or maybe I need to get rid of somebody. I don't have somebody that they should be out of the company. And the final one is engineer. And this is the methods we use, the processes and systems we use to do stuff. And sometimes they haven't kept up. For example, what worked when we were $5 million, now that we're $30 million, the systems don't work and we need to invest in them to allow us to go to the next level. So analyst or player to find the kink, architect, coach, or engineer to fix the kink. And that's really the roadmap using those hats.
Well, I appreciate that, my friend. And Jim, I also wanted to ask you about the importance of inclusive and empathetic leadership and where you see a correlation between the two. What are your thoughts there?
I think, I wrote an article about this, that charisma in leadership is really made up of 2 things. One is competency. So you need to be good at what you do. You have to be, smart or work hard or whatever. And compassion or empathy, to your point. And, you can imagine working for somebody who was really competent and they weren't compassionate. They had no compassion for humans. Well, that'd be horrible to work for somebody like that because it just would be rough and hard and aggressive all the time. And on the other side, if you got somebody that's all compassion, they want to give you a big hug and they want to know how you're doing, but they never hold you accountable. They never move the business forward. They're not competent. Well, that's not very interesting either because it's not a great place to be because that company won't last long. So it's that combination of compassion and competency that makes great leaders. So I think it's super critical. but it's not the only thing that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I also wanted to drill down with you this morning, Jim, is your thoughts and philosophies on how CEOs can avoid the inevitable burnout that comes from leading an organization. Because, CEOs are expected to be, the psychologist and the leader of the business, but sometimes, it's hard to strike that balance. So how do you think we can avoid CEO burnout? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and I don't think CEOs are different than anybody else in this regard. It's about energy management. You need to be careful that you don't expend all your energy and leave it on the field and you go home exhausted all the time because you're never going to be the best version of yourself if you do that. And so you gotta, I'd say the optimal place to be is 75-80% effort, where there's always a little extra in the tank if you need it. And that balancing that amount of energy involved in the business allows you to extend how far you can be in it before you say, yeah, I can't handle this anymore. And this idea of being lazy, working 50, 55, 60 hours a week, but not 80 hours a week, is part of managing your energy. I think the other thing is the CEO job is very cerebral. You're thinking all the time. And so you need to get away from work, do other things, and just let your brain chew on all those issues. And I play soccer, and while I'm playing soccer, I am not thinking about work, but I guarantee you my brain, way in the back part of it, is just sort of chewing on the problems, and they pop out later. So you've got to get away from it so you can refresh yourself to come back at the problems with a new view.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, I know that you host your own podcast called The Lazy CEO, where you really dive into the details on helping entrepreneurs from a high revenue standpoint really optimize the potential of the business. So tell me about the podcast and the mission behind it, my friend.
Yeah, so we actually changed the name of the podcast to the CEO Project Podcast. We just a couple weeks ago, so you just had a little bit old on the information, and that's on us. We did 100 episodes using the Lazy CEO Podcast, and that was the name of it. And we got some feedback that people didn't love it, so we moved to the CEO Project Podcast, which is the name of my company. And that is more the right spirit, because what we're trying to do is bring tools and ideas to help CEOs improve their performance by bringing in experts or talking to other CEOs about how they do their job. So it's really all designed on how do we help entrepreneurs and CEOs become better at their job. And that's what we try to offer on the podcast. And hopefully we do an okay job at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jim, I also wanted to talk to you about the importance of embracing diverse perspectives as a CEO. Jim, I live my life through the saying that no matter how many degrees you have on a wall, you can always learn something from your neighbor, whether it be in business or in life, my friend. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the importance of valuing sort of the diverse perspectives and the advantages that can bring to a company.
Mm-hmm. Well, the research here is pretty clear that a diverse group of people come up with better answers than a group of people that are not diverse, whether that's experience and background or culture or whatnot, male, female, race, it doesn't matter. But the more diverse your group is, the better the answer you're going to develop, because it's going to be thoughtful, looking at the problem from different axes. And that's how I think about it. If I put a bunch of engineers in the room, they look at the problem one way, like engineers do. But what if I put a marketer and an engineer and a finance person and a salesperson, and they all have different cultural backgrounds, and they go, well, I get why you think that works as an engineer, but that doesn't work for us over here. And here's why. All of a sudden, we're crafting a better answer together than we would have had if we just had engineers in the room. And I'm an engineer. I'm picking on engineers, but I am one. So diversity yields better answers and more customer attuned answers. So I'm all about, put a group of people that are going to look at the problem differently and end up with a better answer at the end, as long as you have respect for each other. And that's the other key is, when you're working together, you've got to respect other people's views and go, that doesn't matter. That's not important. That doesn't work. You got to say, okay, I don't agree, but I hear you. Why do you think like that? Help me understand. That's the right attitude to take when you're working in a diverse environment.
Yeah, and just following up on that, Jim, outside of hosting this podcast, I talk to leaders and business owners and top business people about the importance of hiring individuals with disabilities.
Mhm.
It's important to me because I was born with one, and I found out as a result of my cerebral palsy that I wouldn't be able to walk for the duration of my life because of the severity of my disability. But I'm also curious to ask you about the importance of hiring folks with disabilities and how we can get CEOs or leaders of organizations to change their mindsets and attitudes about hiring people that have a disability. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think at the moment, unfortunately, it takes somebody who's enlightened, right? And the question you need to ask is not what can't they do, it's what can they do. And so, depending on your disability, whether it's mental, physical, or whatever, there's some things that are very hard to do. Maybe you need augmentation, but there are a lot of things you can do straight up awesome. And so to try to build a team, I think you need to tap all kinds of talent. And again, back to they see the world through a different lens, they understand the problems differently. That I think that's an incredibly powerful group of people to tap into, and not enough CEOs do it because they go, "Well, it's kind of hard to do it. We're not going to do it." And I don't think they say that, but I think if you look at their behavior, that's what they're doing. And so you need to be enlightened that everybody can bring something to the table, and you need to embrace what they can do and lean into that. And I think that's a powerful way that CEOs think about this problem.
Yeah, and Jim, I'm curious to get your thoughts on your definition of making assertive decisions and being an assertive leader that also listens. What do you think the correlation is between those two things, my friend?
Well, I think people like to follow confident people. Confidence is compelling, and good leaders are confident. And the problem with any skill that if we overcorrect, too much confidence becomes arrogance. And so you got to be really careful as a confident leader that it does not drift into arrogance. And so what I did, because I'm a confident guy and I always worried that it would be perceived a certain way, I would always ask people to check my thinking. I go, hey, and I would show them why I think what I think. And a lot of leaders won't do that. They just go, it's X. That's it. And that's arrogance. If you go, look, it's X, but let me explain why I think that's the answer. This is why I think this is the answer. What am I missing? Where am I making a mistake? What didn't I consider? And then have a real conversation and hear what people say. And that's the way to balance confidence and not making a mistake, because the problem of being overly confident and assertive is you can drive the bus right off the cliff. And nobody said, hey, there's a cliff coming. And you really want people to say, whoa, 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 whoa. That might be a mistake. Let's talk about why. And whenever anybody said that, I really did try to listen. I wasn't always perfect, but I did try to listen because I'm like, okay, they may have an idea that I do not have or have a view that I never would have had. Back to your diversity comment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, if I asked you to come up with three principles for effective leadership, how would you answer that question?
Mm-hmm. I think one is if you're going to be an effective leader, you need to care about people. Like you need to want to work with people to achieve results, with and through people to achieve results. If you don't like working with people, you shouldn't be a leader. You should be an individual contributor doing something else. The second is I think you need to enjoy power. Now that sounds weird. People go, oh, power is scary. And I think power for like any tool, they talk about in Star Wars, use the force for good. Power can be used to create amazing stuff used properly. And so I think good leaders don't mind using power for good purposes. And then the third one is I think you have to have a vision. I think you need to be able to paint a picture of where you're bringing the organization that people get excited about, and they want to follow you to that place. If you can't paint a vision of the future that people get excited about, they go, well, he's a guy and he makes money and I don't know quite where we're going. And it's not very interesting or compelling, particularly to the current generation. So a vision, compassionate about people, are a couple of the elements that are super important, I think, to be a good leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, how do you think the current state of business was affected by the pandemic? And what do you think we learned about being leaders as CEOs as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, my friend?
Yes. So we've had to massively change our leadership style as a result of the global pandemic. You still see people struggling with it, which is it used to be people would come into the office. I could put my hands on them. I could see them. I could meet with them. I could read their body language. And, going virtual and remote has really changed how we must lead. How do you build a team? How do you assess people? How do you build relationship when it's remote like this? It's a skill set that none of us really were good at. A couple of companies, GitHub being one, but most of us didn't. Those muscles were weak. We didn't know how to do that. We were not good at it. And even now, you see a lot of very technical companies, Amazon for example, doing a return to office because they go, look, this remote thing, we haven't figured it out. We're not very good at it. Everybody come back to the office. We're going back to the old way of doing the things because we know that works. And I think you're going to see a big trend towards more and more return to office and somewhat less fully remote, maybe hybrid, and it's really about leadership never fully adapted to a completely remote model, and we're just not good at it. And so there's a lot of work to be done on how do you run a remote organization and accomplish great things, and that was a direct impact of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, I wanted to talk to you about learning and communication and the correlation between the two, because not all leaders who are in positions of power are great communicators. So tell me about the power of both learning and communication. How do you think those are interconnected?
Well, learning doesn't correlate necessarily to being a great communicator. That is a skill in and of itself. Some people have it, some people don't. So I think you have to look at them as independent, and the ability to bring concepts down to a simple way of talking about them and then communicate it clearly is something that some people have and some people don't. And I think to some extent, education does help because the process of becoming educated causes you to organize your mind. So people with low levels of education, some, not all, some they've never been forced to sort of communicate clearly, to bring your ideas down to a point, and so they struggle to do it, and that means they struggle to communicate. Those that have gone through some level of education, they got forced to learn how to make your point, whether it's a paper or a speech or whatever, and that translated into communication. So I think it's the people that can take a whole jumble of ideas, pull out the critical items, and then explain them in a way that makes sense. Those are your really good communicators. And it is loosely correlated to education, but not fully correlated to education.
Yeah, and what association to being a good listener makes you a good CEO? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think listening is a skill in and of itself at any level, any manager, any partner, wife, spouse, husband. If you're not a good listener, you're in trouble. And I think where it falls down, people are thinking so hard about what they want to say that they're not listening to what you're saying. And it's really obvious. I think people pick it up in a heartbeat. They're not listening to me. They're not hearing what I'm saying by how they respond and just the body language. So I think you've got to quiet your brain a little bit and just listen before you go to your response. And that's hard. I think people that are like kind of trying to move and have an agenda, they sometimes don't listen well because they're so focused on what they want to say, they're not listening to what the other person is saying. So it is a developed skill for sure. And I think sort of dominant, confident people like CEOs struggle to do it because they know right where they want to go. And your comments are not helping me get there any faster. So I might not pay attention because it's in the way of me achieving my objective. And that is really at your own risk because maybe it's super important and you might have missed something that would blow the whole program up if you're not careful.
Yeah, and Jim, I know that you have a passion for nonprofit organizations. I know that you're involved in the National Association of Corporate Directors and the Boy Scouts of America, my friend, just to name a few. So I'm curious to ask you where your passion for nonprofits comes from and why you love giving back, my friend.
Yeah, well, this goes back to Kennedy, and he said, "From those who much is given, much is expected." The same thing. It actually came from Mark, the Bible, and I've always felt like I was blessed beyond measure with capability and opportunity and so forth, and therefore an obligation exists for you to give back. And even more, though, my life purpose is to make the world a better place than when I came. I want to have that's the monument to my life is the world is better. And part of how you do that is through nonprofits. Business is one way to do it. Business has a mission, and you certainly can make huge difference in business. But I like the diversity of also operating in the nonprofit area, and I have my whole career basically. So I think it's really important, and it gives you another view of the world that can inform how you live your life. So anybody who's not involved in a nonprofit giving back, I highly recommend you do it. I've gotten a lot of blessings out of that personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jim, I know that you're an avid soccer player and you've even conquered Mount Kilimanjaro, my friend. In addition, you're a level 2 certified sommelier, my friend. So tell me, where does your sense of adventure come from and why do these passions specifically fill your cup of fulfillment, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm an experienced guy and a learner, those two things. And so if there's a new experience, a friend calls and says, "Hey, I got this opportunity to do something crazy you've never done before," I am all in. So climbing Kilimanjaro was one of those experiences. I said, I would like to try to do that at some point in my life. The opportunity presented itself. So my answer was, heck yeah, of course I want to do it. And with regard to the sommelier thing, I mean, I do enjoy wine, but more than that, I love learning. So this was an opportunity to learn deeply about a topic that I found interesting, and I spent a couple of years to become a certified sommelier. And so outdoor adventure, new experiences, travel, and learning are really my happy place. My number one motivator is learning, and so anytime I have an opportunity to try something new or learn something new, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, and Jim, I know that you're a believer in developing strategies for the sort of the entrepreneur and really giving CEOs their time back. So I'm curious about how do you think we can outsource effectively, and what strategies for delegation do you think are crucial for businesses?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time talking with CEOs about delegation because some are good and some are bad. But one of the rules we help them develop is what we call the 70% rule. In other words, if somebody working for you is 70% as good as you are at something, you should immediately delegate it to them. And that gives people permission to move things off their plate. Normally they wait. Well, I got to wait till they're as good as I am. Well, here's the story. If you wait till somebody's as good as you are, you're never going to delegate anything because they haven't gotten to do it the way you do it. And so they haven't learned how to be good at it. So 70% delegate it. But then you need to think about how aggressively do you delegate? Do you say, "Hey, take this. I never want to hear what you did about it. Done." Or do you want to say, "Look, check it out. Come back and talk to me. We'll have a conversation. Then we'll decide what to do." And so depending on the risk of the item, high risk, we don't delegate aggressively. Low risk, we delegate aggressively. And then you look at the person. Are they really experienced and competent? Delegate aggressively. If they're young and new and they really haven't had the experience yet, don't delegate quite so aggressively. So it's off your plate and you don't have to spend as much time. You love to go to full delegation when you have to spend no time, but you have to really be careful to do that. Sometimes you delegate, let's say partially, if you will, but you still get the time back. So it's a win. So that's the model, 70% rule, and think about how aggressively do you delegate to somebody based on risk and competency.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jim, I know that you say that we all have the capability to impact 1 million lives, my friend. And I know you're on a constant journey to do that. So tell me, why do you believe that? And how's your own personal mission of doing that going, my friend? What are your thoughts there?
So I talked about, business as a mission, and I really believe that, that it is one of the spheres of influence in society. And we have the opportunity to do an incredible amount of good and have as business people. So our goal at the CEO Project is to positively impact 1 million lives. Now we do that by helping CEOs become better CEOs. And our thinking is if the CEO is better, and most research says that 40% of the outcome of the business comes from the performance of the CEO. If the CEO is better, then everybody's lives inside that company are better as well. They can buy a truck, they can send their kid to college, they can whatever they want to do, but the business is more stable, they have security. All of those things are true with a better CEO, and we directly influence that. So at the moment, we are at, and we keep track of this, about 400,000 employees work for all of the CEOs that we work with. And so, we've got, as we grow the number of CEOs we work with, we grow the number of people we impact. And our goal is to get to impacting 1 million people on a regular basis. And we'll get there. It's going to take a little time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jim, I'm curious to ask you about having a discipline as a chief executive officer. What do you think is the key to having great discipline as a CEO, my friend?
Well, I think that people that are good at this are very mature and have a lot of self-awareness. And honestly, some are good at discipline and some are not so good at it. And yet, if they're not good at it, they put people around them that will help them become more disciplined, like a good executive assistant or whatever. Some that are very disciplined, they wake up early, they work out every day, they eat the same breakfast, they just are very aware of how they achieve maximum productivity, and they are willing to make the sacrifices to achieve that. And why? Because they have a responsibility for all the people in their company. So it's not just them. Even if I'm uncomfortable and I make all the people that work for me's lives better, that's a good trade. And so I think some are good at it, some are not, and it's all about self-awareness and maturity that allows you to be a good, high disciplined leader.
Yeah, and as a CEO, Jim, I'm curious to ask you about strategies to overcome adversity and how we can use those lessons to be better CEOs and use it as a competitive advantage moving forward. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I've always loved Dale Carnegie's. He wrote a book called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And I really resonated to what he said there. He said, consider the matter, understand what the worst case scenario is. What's the worst thing that could happen? Figure out a way to be okay with that, whether by protecting, risk mitigation, whatever. Then figure out what is the most you can do to get you the good outcome that you want. Do that. At that point, you've done everything you can and you just got to let it go. And some people keep worrying about it. But look, if you can live with the worst outcome and you've done everything you know how to do, worrying doesn't help. The outcome's going to be what the outcome's going to be. And so I've always lived by that. And I've found it useful, not only personally, but I've also taught it in my organizations of, exactly that model. We're going to do everything we can, and then we're going to let it go and be okay with the outcome.
Yeah, and Jim, in terms of relationship building and actually going out and building relationships, a lot of CEOs may be good at the tactical portion of running a business, but if you're not great at building relationships, it's my belief that you won't be a leader for long. So, what do you think is the key to building great relationships in business?
And I agree. I mean, I think influence is based on relationship. So no relationship, no influence. And obviously, as CEOs, we need influence in order to achieve the objectives that we have. But how do you build relationship? And I think it's really simple, which is a genuine interest in the other person. If I'm genuinely interested, like I show compassion to the point you made earlier, people will build relationship with you over time. Now, some won't, but most will. We just had a guy named Doug Conant come to our CEO summit. Doug ran Campbell Soup, big company. He spent a lot of time really getting to know and understand his people, and that relationship that he built with them was able to translate into business results because they trusted him, they liked him, and they believed in where he was bringing the company. So I think investing the time to build a relationship is super important to building influence, and influence is important to getting an outcome.
Yeah, and Jim, my final question for you this morning has to do with overall legacy and leaving an impact, my friend. I always think about legacy as if someone threw me a lifetime achievement party, what would I want them to say about me, my friend? So I pose that question to you. If I threw you a lifetime achievement party and asked your friends to say something nice about you, my friend, what do you think they would say, and what would you want them to say about your life and legacy, my friend?
Mm-hmm. There's an exercise like this, which is to write your eulogy. What are they going to say at your funeral, and what do you want them to say, and then start living that way, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I would start with he lived a good life. He maximized the time he had on this planet, both personally and professionally. He built great relationships. He was generous, and he made a huge impact on business and progress of society. And if they said that, man, that's a life well lived. So I'd be happy with that answer.
Absolutely, my friend. And finally, Jim, if people want to get connected with you or the CEO project, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, so you can reach out to us at theceoproject.com. We're on LinkedIn like crazy, or you can send me an email at jim@theceoproject.com, and we'll get right back to you.
Well, absolutely. Jim, I have to tell you, I enjoyed engaging in conversation with you this morning about business leadership and how we can become better CEOs. My friend, you're doing great work, and I want to thank you for engaging in conversation with me this morning. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin. It was a lot of fun.